Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@usaprepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Yeah? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Your dial is set correctly to USA Prepares. Jason is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota, just me today. And I thought I would talk about some tips, the way I do things, read from my notebooks, some topics about the way we do things here at the farm. And this is almost 7 decades of experience of mine, plus those of my parents and grandparents and things that I've been taught and things that we've experienced, and doing things a little bit better, a little easier, a little much more frugally. And if you'd like to weigh in, you're certainly welcome to do that. I'd like you to stay on topic today. The topic is preparedness. Now, we're not going to be talking about zombie apocalypse. We're going to be talking about just ways to do things better. If you'd like to call, we'll pay for the call, 866-582-9933, 866-582-9933. And the telephone listen line is up and running, 605-477-3249. So I asked my wife this morning, so I said, it's just going to be me today. What do you think I should talk about in the world of preparedness? And she said winterization. That's okay. And I asked Jason what he thought, and he said the same thing. So here we go. So if you have a lawnmower, whether it be a push type or walk behind or zero turn, or a riding lawnmower, or a rototiller, or a weed whacker, any of those devices that use gasoline, what you should do, in my opinion, is drain the fuel tank before you put it away for the winter. Drain the fuel tank. But then you still have fuel in the carburetor. And what happens is alcohol, the 10% alcohol that is mandated by the government, is hygroscopic. It collects moisture from the air and it corrodes everything except stainless steel and plastic. So there's plenty of parts in the carburetor, mostly aluminum, that will corrode, and it wreaks havoc. So what you do is drain that fuel tank, then start that device up and run it out of fuel. Run the fuel, burn the fuel that's in the carburetor through the natural process of running the engine. And when it shuts down, because it ran out of fuel, you're good to go for the winter. That's what we do. And but what about the batteries in those devices and the batteries in cars? Well, the electrolyte in the lead acid battery will freeze if the battery has a zero charge, meaning it's dead, at about 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Same temperature water freezes. The electrolyte in the battery is sulfuric acid, and it's dangerous. You can be blinded, you can burn your skin, so if you happen to get some on you, immediately wash with water, and then you could use baking soda, but don't go hunting around for the baking soda. Immediately dilute that sulfuric acid that might splash on you with water immediately, if not sooner. Always wear glasses, safety glasses, and protective gloves and protective clothing. Sulfuric acid will eat holes through your blue jeans. It will burn your skin, and you don't want to breathe it. So keep those thoughts in mind as you work on your vehicles. Well, what I do is I check the battery electrolyte level, and of course wear all the precautions. And by the way, don't do anything I discuss here at all. Don't even think about it unless you do your own research and learn more about what you're doing. And if you do, you're doing it at your own risk. Don't blame me if you get hurt. Okay? So learn how to do it, and you can plenty of YouTube videos. I'll just give you the primer on how to start thinking about these things. But I do these things. So I top off the battery. There are caps on many batteries, but I guess the lawyers got involved to prevent you from checking the electrolyte in your automotive battery and lawnmower battery and motorcycle battery and four-wheeler battery. So a lot of those are sealed so that you cannot add distilled water to your battery. And that's the only thing you would add to a lead-acid battery, and that's distilled water. You don't top off with sulfuric acid. Only distilled water. Not tap water, not mineral water, only distilled water. And that's because what happens is the electrolyte, through the process of charging and discharging the battery, some of that water evaporates to the air. And it leaves behind the acid, more concentrated. So all you do is bring the acid, sulfuric acid, back to its original height, and there are markings to do that. And you can find that on the internet. Different batteries have different indicators to tell you where the fill to point is. So you can top it off, put the battery caps back on, clean off the terminals, and I just use a garden hose. I just hose off the battery with a garden hose before I start, check the electrolyte level, and then for the winter you can put a trickle charger on the battery. A trickle charger is a small charger, and it might produce a half an ampere of current. It might produce up to 1 ampere of current. 1 ampere is 12 watts, or 13 watts, or 14 watts, depending on the voltage coming out of the trickle charger. So it does not use a lot of electricity. And some people leave the trickle chargers on all the time. I don't do that. I put a trickle charger on for, let's say, a day, once a week. So 24 hours, once a week. And that way I don't boil the battery over. And you'll find out that if you have a relatively modern car, in the last 20 years or so, a lot of them have alarm systems, and they have computers that are always on. Even though you've got the key out of the ignition, it's always on. Always draining that battery. So a trickle charger will keep that battery from going dead. And when the battery goes dead, it is likely to freeze. And when it freezes, permanent damage is done. Permanent, irreversible damage. Once a battery freezes, you can't fix it. And if you want to know if a battery is frozen, it's really easy to do. What you do is you feel the sides, the ends of the battery, vertically. And if it's bulged out, it is frozen. So if there's a bulge on the sides of the battery, where the terminals are, it's frozen. It had already been frozen, and it's not coming back. So that would be a core, and that's the one that you want to turn in if you're going to get another battery. So trickle charger, and I got to tell you, the best trickle charger I've found, I bought directly from China. I eliminated the middleman, and it's this little tiny thing with a short cord. Maybe the cord is maybe a foot long, and it has 2 alligator clips on it, and an LED light to tell you that it's on. Of course, you'll have to attach it to an extension cord. It's real small. It's about half the size of a deck of cards. Works great, and I've been using them for a couple years. I really like one. It's the same exact one that Rich Sheehan has, and I sent him one, and he likes it too. And so those are some of my thoughts on car batteries, truck batteries, motorcycle batteries, ATV batteries. So you might want to keep that in mind. A battery will freeze if it is discharged. And I see them all the time. I mean, so many people have vehicles outside and they don't think, geez, that battery is $130, $160, $200. They don't think that if they don't keep it charged, it will be useless. after the first freeze. So we spent a day, literally a day, going through all of our vehicles to make sure that the batteries were charged. And I actually have a really neat charging a set of chargers. I bought 6 of them. And if you want to know what they are, they're made by a company called Xantrex, Xantrex. I believe they make the finest battery chargers in the world. I buy them used on the internet, and sometimes I can find a 10-amp model that will support charging 2 batteries at the same time. And I really like it because it is smart enough. It's sophisticated. It has computer processing in it. It is sophisticated enough to determine what the battery level is in terms of charge and at what level it should charge it, meaning a fast charge or just a trickle charge. It determines what it needs. And that's what I use. And I pay about between $50 and, let's say $70 shipped for these Xantrex battery chargers, 10 amps. We keep one in the shop. It's a 20-amp model. It'll charge 3 batteries at a time. And so let me share with you some of my thoughts about how to connect a battery charger. So in our barn, we have a lot of equipment. We've got tractors. We've got all kinds of devices that have lead-acid batteries. There are probably 20 batteries, maybe more, in the barn. How do we keep all of them charged once a week? Well, as I mentioned, I have about 6 of these Xantrex chargers. And I also have trickle chargers. And what I've done is I don't like the cables that they put on battery chargers. They're too short. They're only like 6 feet long at the most, for the kind that you'd buy at the Chinese factory outlet. So what I do is I get online and I buy extension cords from the Chinese factory outlet, 50-footers, 16 gauge. So if you were to read it, it'd be 16 AWG, American wire gauge. And I cut the ends off. And I use those orange extension cords as the cable that comes out of the 12-volt side of the battery charger. And I solder on better battery cable clamps, not the cheesy ones that you get with chargers today. I buy them right from China, too. They're about maybe $3 for a set of 2, shipped right from China, so I buy 10 at a time. And they're not great, but they're way better than anything that comes on a battery charger. The ones that come on a battery charger are probably 25 cents. They're really cheesy. They corrode. They don't transfer current very well. So what I do is, if you look at a battery cable clamp, it has 2 jaws that clamp on the battery terminals. But only one of those jaws is actually connected to the wire that goes to the charger. I don't think that's such a good idea. So what I do is I take like a 16 gauge wire, short piece, maybe 4 inches long, and I solder one end of that wire, that short wire, to one side of the battery cable clamp, where you grip it and squeeze it, and I go through the spring to the other side and solder it on. Now both jaws are connected. We'll be right back. So I'm talking about battery chargers and the way I modify them here at the farm. I think it's a better idea. At least for me it is. If you look at a typical battery charger, it's got cheesy clamps, and the clamps don't transfer electricity from the wire that drives the clamp to both sides of the clamp. The only way for electricity to get to the other side that's not connected to that cable clamp, the other jaw, is through that hinge pin. And I think that's a cheesy way of doing it. So what I do is I take a piece of wire, just a couple inches long, and I measure it about 16 gauge, 14 gauge is fine, stranded wire, has to be stranded. And I solder one side of the cable clamp over to the other side. And the idea is I want both jaws of that cable clamp to transfer electricity from the battery charger. So if one jaw doesn't get a good connection on the lead terminal or the side terminal of a General Motors battery, the other jaw will. And that's how I do that. And then, of course, I solder the lead wire to that cable clamp that goes to the battery charger. So I take that 50-foot extension cord. Why? Because it's got an orange jacket on it. It's easy to see and not trip over. And it's the least expensive way of doing it. You can't buy 2 pieces of wire for $10 that's 50 feet long. But you can with an extension cord. So I just cut off the ends. And it kind of bothers me doing that. So I leave like maybe 2 feet of the receptacle end. And sometimes I leave maybe 6 feet of the plug end. So I could always use that for some other purpose. So I just don't cut it off and throw it away. Make sure it's usable. And then what I do is I hang that battery charger on the wall in the barn or in the automotive shop. And I coil that cord on a garden hose type rack. I loop it around, and I coil it, and I leave the charger unplugged. That way, when I want to charge a battery, it's ready to go. All I do is plug in the charger, connect it to the battery, and I'm good to go. And I can go, well, I've got one that's probably 100 feet long. I've got some that are 40 feet long, some that are 50 feet long. And that's a pretty neat way, I think, of keeping the battery chargers out of the rain, out of the weather, out of overnight temperatures, and keep them dry. They last a long time. And it works for me. We've got, I've got Alan in Indiana. Alan in Indiana, welcome. You're on with me.
Yes, that was quick. Anyway, I was wondering if you had talked about garden carburetors.
I have, but we can do it again. What's your question about them specifically?
How to make them last longer.
Okay. Well, and that's what I talked about. But let me just give you a thumbnail sketch. What happens, Alan, you're talking about 1 or 2 cylinder air-cooled engines for like a riding mower or a 1-cylinder rototiller engine or a single-cylinder lawnmower engine, that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Chainsaw, whatever.
Okay. Chainsaw, weed whacker, leaf blower.
Yep.
All those things. Okay. It's really simple. The biggest problem that we have today, we didn't have this in the 1950s, 1960s, nor the 70s, but we have it today, and that is the 10% ethanol that's in the fuel.
Yes.
The alcohol is hygroscopic. It attracts moisture, and the moisture combined with the alcohol and the gasoline will corrode aluminum surfaces. Actually, any surface other than stainless steel and plastic, and maybe rubber. So that's most of your carburetor. So what happens is if you leave fuel in your carburetor over the winter, you can be almost guaranteed that your carburetor will not perform properly after that. So what I do is I drain the fuel. Now, I'll tell you how I actually do it, but you've got to be really careful if you do it the way I do. I'll start that engine to make sure it starts up fine. Then I'll shut it off. Okay? Then when the engine's cold, and this is important, when the engine's cold, drain that fuel tank. And sometimes you'll have to take a hose clamp off to drain the fuel tank. Okay?
Right.
And then you drain the fuel line, and then you start the engine. Stay with me, please, and I'll tell you the rest of the story. We're going into a commercial break at the bottom of the hour. I'll tell you the rest of the story, and you can ask any other questions you'd like. We'll be right back. Talking about preparedness tips and items in the book today, and we've been talking about winterizing. Alan's with us in Indiana. He had a question about carburetors for gasoline-powered, air-cooled engines and what to do to keep the carburetor working. And so, Alan, here's what I do, and I don't recommend anybody do this, but here's what I do, and you got to be really careful. I'll start the engine. It'll have a small amount of gasoline in it already. I'll start the engine, just run it for a couple seconds, and then shut it off. I don't want it to get very hot because that's when you could really hurt yourself. And then I wait till it cools off, whether it be a leaf blower or a rototiller or a lawnmower, and then I drain the fuel once it's cooled. I'll drain the fuel from the fuel tank, and then I'll attach the fuel line back, and then I'll start it up again, and I'll run the engine until it runs out of fuel. That way I know there's no fuel in the carburetor. Then it's safe to put that device away for the wintertime. And that's how I do it. Is that kind of clear, or do you need more description?
No, that's clear. One suggestion on larger pieces of equipment, if you put a shutoff valve underneath the gas tank and then run it dry, would that work?
Absolutely, and we buy them by the 10-pack. As a matter of fact, I'm really glad you mentioned that, Alan. I didn't know how deep to go with this discussion, but we buy 10 packs of fuel shutoff valves. So typically they don't come with the equipment. We put the fuel shutoff valve in line as you're talking about it. We buy Ideal brand, IDEAL brand, the small hose clamps, because they're the world's best. The ones that Harbor Freight sells that look like they're stainless steel, that are actually some kind of a plated plain steel. They're junk, absolute junk. So you have to spend twice as much, maybe 3 times as much to get the good old American brand Ideal with the shutoff valves. It works great. But not only do we do that, Alan, we buy 10 packs of fuel filters for small equipment, because a lot of the small carburetors don't have inline fuel filters. And you can buy them on eBay, as well as the shutoff valves and the Ideal hose clamps. So yeah, that's what you should do. And the problem is that this hygroscopic nature of the alcohol that's blended with the gasoline causes these problems. We used to have just gumming up problems where the fuel, the gasoline would volatilize and you'd be left with gum. Now, and that would take a couple of years. Now we have problems where the fuel becomes corrosive within a year. And let me tell you a little bit more about this. A couple of years ago, I pulled the rototiller out of our barn. And it was during the summer months, so I shouldn't have had to drain the fuel. And, of course, what I do is, before I start any engine of this type, I check the oil level. And there's a little dipstick in this Troy Bolt rototiller. I checked the oil level, and it was higher than full. There's no way that I overfill the oil crankcase on these engines. No way. I'm very deliberate, very meticulous, very careful. And I thought, how is this possible? There's only one way. That the oil in the crankcase was diluted with gasoline, because the needle and the seat in the carburetor, the shutoff internally in the carburetor, which is a needle and a seat and a float valve, failed. Drip, drip, drip from the gasoline overhead through the carburetor into the intake manifold, down the intake valve, or past the rings of the piston into the crankcase. And I called up, so that's what happened. The gas tank was filling the oil crankcase. Now, I would have destroyed the engine had I started it, because gasoline doesn't lubricate worth a darn. It actually washes away the lubricant. So I called up Troy Bolt, and I said, yo, I was a little more polite than that, but what gives? And they said, oh, yeah. Carburetors are routine maintenance items, like spark plug, changing the oil, air cleaners, carburetors. And I said, no way. And they said, oh, yeah. It's the alcohol in the fuel. And they said, have you been using such and such a fuel? And I said, what's that? They said, well, you can buy it at, Walmart. And I said, tell me about that fuel. And they said, well, you can buy it in a gallon can. Well, how much does that cost? $20. So, so this guy who's reading this script has no idea what he's talking about, is telling me to buy $19.99 plus sales tax fuel for my little rototiller. And that's because that fuel does not have alcohol in it. So one way to help prevent some of this is to buy only gasoline. It would be a premium fuel. It's probably, maybe $3 a gallon, but without alcohol. But where do you buy that? And how do you actually know if that's really what it is? I mean, you buy it from the gas station, how do you know that it hasn't been mixed with alcohol? So I'm not taking a chance. What I just do is what I said: drain the fuel tank, drain the carburetor by running it. Does that make sense to you?
Yes. Another question. Aviation fuel has no alcohol in it.
That's correct.
It's 105% octane. If that's available, you think that would be better to use?
Yeah, and the research that I've done on aviation fuel with generators and with other engines. Now, I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that and read that it runs a little bit hotter. So if your cooling system is not up to par, you could damage your engine. Is that true? I don't know. But I can tell you, one of the reasons I know a little bit about engines and automobiles is I used to build race cars. And I used to drive the race cars that I built. So I was like the designer, the mechanic, the engineer, all of it. And I would test out my thoughts. Racing cars is, how can you make this thing go faster than the other guys? What kind of ingenuity can you apply to the mechanics of the internal combustion engine? So I tried racing. I know that regular fuel burns faster than premium fuel. I know that. But it is more inclined to knock and ping from high compression. So I tested regular fuel with changing the spark advance compared to the premium fuel. And because you can advance the spark more with premium fuel, you can go a little faster. But I'm not convinced that there's more energy. So I really don't know about the aviation fuel. But if that's all you have, great. But there are, like in Lebanon, Missouri, there are stations, and these would be independent gas stations, not those stop and rob places, that have premium, no alcohol, off-road type fuel. So yeah, I would consider buying that, but you can't be sure if that's really what it is, because here's another thing that's happened, and this has been happening ever since gas stations had premium fuel. The gas station owner, on delivery day, would go out to the tanker truck delivering fuel and say, listen, dump 1,000 gallons of regular into my premium tank.
All right.
And the reason for that, and then fill up the rest with premium. And the reason for that is they could sell a whole 1,000 gallons of regular at the premium price, and nobody would know. Money. Greed. Yep.
There was one gas station here that was dumping water into the diesel fuel tank.
No, it doesn't work at all. I mean, literally one drop of water will shut down a diesel. So, but taking a tank out today, it used to be that gas tanks were made out of steel, plated steel, and a lot of them had drain plugs. So if you accidentally got moisture or through the use of, or not filling the fuel tank up and letting it sit out on a cold day, the moisture in the air would condense, form droplets of water in the fuel tank. The idea was you could drain the fuel tank. And that was a common thing. Well, now we don't have drain plugs on fuel tanks. As a matter of fact, it's really difficult to get the fuel out of a tank today. I mean, really, really difficult. You want to make sure the tank is empty before you have to take the tank out. And that's usually not the case. You usually have a problem when you have fuel in the tank. So it's a very expensive proposition. It can cost $1,000 to fix a fuel pump on a vehicle today because the fuel pump is in the tank. And in a truck, for example, and it's just a little side note, a lot of trucks, pickup trucks, American pickup trucks, fuel pump is in the tank. And to get to the fuel pump, you have a choice. You either take the fuel tank out, which could be as big as 35 gallons, sometimes 34 gallons, sometimes 26 gallons.
Yep.
To get the fuel tank out is a major job, and you have to have a lift and a couple guys to do it. And maybe a transmission type jack to hold it up while you lower the tank. Another way to do it is take the bed off the truck. Now, I'm not kidding. Literally unbolt the bed, have 4 guys lift the bed off the truck so you can get to the fuel tank. Another way that people do it is they find the exact location to the best of their ability, of that fuel pump access ring at the top of the fuel tank. And they cut a hole in the bed.
Right.
Which is crazy. Absolutely crazy. And I was watching a video of this guy. We had exactly that problem here with a 1-ton Dodge Ram van, one of those that rides around the city with, it's kind of like a mini bus, yep. And needed a fuel pump. And this guy said, "Oh, here's what you do." And he just took a grinding wheel and cut open the floor of the van, and he like 4 or 5 different holes he made trying to find the right spot. And when I talk about holes, I'm talking like 8 by 8 inches each.
Wow.
Yep.
Anyway.
So it sounds like you're mechanically inclined.
Semi, trying. Another question on oil lamps, oil for lamps.
Uh-huh.
What's a suggestion?
You're probably talking about kerosene, right?
Yes. Well,
yeah.
In other words, the small lamps that have like a quart base and then a stem with a wick.
Yes. Yeah. Typically, you want to use K1 kerosene. Sometimes it's called 1K. Sometimes it's called K1. And at the end of the season, I was able to buy some 5-gallon barrels of that, and it was maybe $7 or $8. Ridiculously low price. They couldn't. It was at Lowe's, and they couldn't wait to get rid of it at the end of the season. So I bought them. I've got them stacked up in case I ever need it. But I've never used it, and here's why. I don't recommend. And we have oil lamps. We have them from we have antique oil lamps here from the 1800s.
Yep.
And they're nice. I've inherited these. I bought some myself. Mrs. Finelli bought some at flea markets over the years. And yes, we used to use them, but we have dogs, we have cats, and TJ's tail and his head. I mean, if he wants to park his face on the kitchen table, he's certainly big enough to do that. If he turned around and knocked that thing over, it'd be a mess, it'd be a fire. So I don't recommend it, but I will tell you what I do have the answer. If you want to hold it, I'll talk you through it, and you can build this. You can build this yourself. Alan has joined us. He's in Indiana. We're talking about preparedness. I want to thank Alan for joining us this morning. He's in Indiana. He had some questions about this. Let me just jump back to the carburetor for just a second.
All right.
So when I called Troy-Bilt, they said, the carburetor is a routine maintenance item, and you need to replace the carburetors every couple of years. And I thought that was crazy. And I asked them how much, and they said about $75 plus shipping and handling. So the amount of money they wanted was crazy. You can go to eBay, and if you get that make and model of the device, whether it be a chainsaw or a lawnmower or a generator, you're going to need a carburetor for it anyway. So you can go to eBay, you can type in the make and model, and you can find that carburetor, and it'll be about $10, maybe $15, shipped, delivered. Okay? It'll be a Chinese carburetor, and that's what the other one is anyway. So it's not like you're replacing an American carburetor with a Chinese one. You're replacing a Chinese one with a Chinese one. So here's what you do. You can buy it on eBay, and we bought a whole bunch of them. All of our devices, carburetors have failed. All the motorcycles, all the rototiller equipment, all the lawnmower equipment, all the chainsaws, all of them. They've all failed because of the fuel. And we drain the fuel. So we probably get a little bit more longevity out than, someone who doesn't drain the fuel, but we still had to buy all new carburetors for everything. And this has been for years we've been doing this. So here's what you do. You drain the fuel. If your carburetor leaked and your oil level is more than it should be, your oil has been diluted with gasoline, drain the fuel. Then replace the carburetor. Then drain the oil and refill it with, now what I use for small gasoline engines is 15W40 diesel engine oil. You can use Delo, you can use Delvac 15W40, because in my opinion it has the right additive package. But do your research, because your research is, it's probably going to be contradicting what I say. It's probably going to say, no, don't do that. Use what the manufacturer recommends. But I'm telling you, that the additives have been removed from the oil. So if you use the latest, greatest engine oil, it's not sufficient. So I use diesel engine oil in all air-cooled gasoline engine devices like lawnmowers and so forth. Not two-cycle. I'm talking about four-cycle engines. Is that sort of clear? And then we'll go on to the alternative I have for the... Okay. All right. So instead of kerosene lamps, they smell, they're sooty, and they're a fire hazard. So I don't use them. What I did was, there's you know what chair rail is? That's that bump guard that goes around the room that the back of the chair would connect with the around a room for molding. Well, there's another railing called picture rail, and that's what in Europe they hang pictures on. So it's about a foot down from the ceiling. So what I did was I made some picture rail. I got the table saw out and I fabricated what I considered a test for a picture rail, and I nailed that around the kitchen, around the perimeter of the kitchen, 1 foot down from the ceiling. Then I bought some LED tape. It's a flexible, semi-flexible, it's like a ribbon almost, and it has LEDs, about 60 LEDs per meter, all facing one direction. And I applied that to the picture rail, facing up. And I connected that with 16-gauge stranded wire. I ran it through the wall, and I hooked it up to a standard light switch, those 35 to 40 cent AC light switches like you have in your house now. I put a box in the wall, and I have a light switch that looks just like any other light switch. It's not special. It's just a light switch. It's an AC light switch, common. It's the least expensive way to go. And I use that to switch on and off this LED strip that runs around the perimeter of the kitchen. And it's 12 volts. So I have it hooked up to a battery. And you can put your battery in your garage or wherever, probably in the garage would be a good place rather than in the basement, because there are fumes that come out when you charge and discharge a lead acid battery. And you can use a marine battery, and it will last months and months and months without discharging. And you put a charger on it. So if the electricity goes out, you walk over to the switch, flip the switch, and you instantly have lighting in your kitchen. Enough lighting to get things done, read by if you want, prepare a meal if you want, if you have a way of opening cans without an electric can opener, should the power go down. That's what we do. Now, I've had one running almost 24 hours a day for 5 years, and still running. So it uses very little wattage. So what current does it draw? Well, about 3 to 4 amperes for 5 meters. And if you want to figure out how many watts that is, you multiply amps times volts and you get watts. So at 12 volts, actually a car battery is more like 13.2, but let's say 12 volts for a car battery times 3 amps for 5 meters of length of this LED lighting strip, that's 36 watts to light up your kitchen. And that's what you can do.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Alan. There you go. So those are a few thoughts about what we do here at our farm for lighting, emergency lighting. Works great. And it's at the flick of a switch. And you can't buy a less expensive switch than the kind that you get at Home Depot or Lowe's or your hardware store. We have maybe extra switches. Haven't had to use very many of them, but the kind I like is Cooper Electric. They're made in Mexico. Used to make them in the United States, but Hubbell makes theirs in China, so Cooper's good. Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. We're doing a preparedness class today, and if you'd like to call in, we'll take your call. 866-582-9933. 866-582-9933. It's just me today. And so in the line of preparing your vehicle for winter, what we did here at the farm was we checked all the engines that are liquid cooled. That means trucks, cars, tractors, bulldozer, backhoe, those kinds of things. And we have a hydrometer. Actually, we have a few hydrometers. And you can buy them for around $5. Typically, they were about $6 or less. Sometimes they're on sale. I think they're on sale at the Chinese factory outlet right now for about $2 and change, maybe $2.99, about $3 plus tax, and tax. And what you do is you remove your radiator reservoir bottle cap, or if you have an older vehicle, your radiator pressure cap. And of course, you don't want to do it when the engine's hot because it's under about 15 pounds of pressure and you can burn yourself. So what we always do is we take a shop rag. Those are those red rags, but you can have, an old T-shirt or an old shirt, and whenever you check the coolant when the engine's hot, you really shouldn't. But if it's an emergency and you have to, wrap it in many layers of cloth, and then you slowly release the pressure very slowly. That's only in an emergency. You shouldn't do it if the engine's hot. But so what you do is you remove the cap, and don't believe anything I say, please. Do your own research. You open up that cap, and there is a tube attached to the hydrometer, and some of them have a floating glass hydrometer bulb. Some of them have a pivoting needle, a pointer, that will point to a scale that'll tell you exactly the protection of coolant that you have or the boil over protection. And we test, and we like minus 35. That's what we like. And I'll tell you what, we've got a call here. Hi, you're on the air with me, Vin Finelli.
Morning, Vince. This is Kyle.
Hey, Kyle. The reason, I see on the call screen a call came in, and our engineer hadn't gotten to you yet, and I thought, I'm just going to take the call. So I didn't know who you were. Normally it says Kyle from MT, Montana, and that's how I would have welcomed you, but I didn't know who you were because he didn't get you at this point. But I thought I didn't want to keep you on hold.
Yeah, that's all right. All the stuff that you think of, Vince, is just incredible. I am so blessed to have known you and call you a friend. One of the things that, and I've done this now for, close to 28 years, when I stumbled on and I've mentioned this before, but just in case there's new listeners, Seafoam, SEA foam. And if you run non-ethanol premium and mix approximately 1 to 1.5 ounces per gallon of Seafoam in your small engines, they will start in the spring like downtown Phoenix, assuming that you do exactly what Vince said and check your oil before when you put them away, and check your oil when you go out to use them in the spring, because in case the needle and seat or the float has failed, you do not want to start that engine with any kind of gasoline, I don't care how good it is, in the crankcase. So I totally agree, but I have my chainsaws, I've got an old 31 steel that I have had for at least 30 years. And I mix up about a gallon of it at a time, and I usually will put about 1.5 ounces or thereabouts, pretty close to about 1.5 ounces of Seafoam in the gas, and mix it up real well, put it in there first, then add gas on top of it, and I'll load up my saws. I'll actually fill them up in the fall and run them for a while with that Seafoam on it in there, and let it get through the carburetor. And I have never yet in 28 years of this had them fail to not start right in the spring and run fine. But I will say this, one of the things I do is I always, and I give it the smell test, and I'm sure you've done this as well. You open the gas tank in the spring and you smell that gas. And if it smells like fresh gas, you're good. But if it smells old, then somehow or another, you've either got some alcohol type ethanol fuel in your tank and got it messed up, which I never do. but I did get a chainsaw one time. I bought at a garage sale, and it was a Poulan Pro, but I couldn't pass it up. The chain looked like brand new, and the thing didn't look like it had been used, and the guy wanted $5 for it. So I bought it, and it wouldn't start. So I figured, well, the seafoam is a really good cleaner. So I took and poured all their gas out. It smelled real bad anyway. So I was afraid I was going to have to replace the carburetor. That was a possibility. So the screws, what I did is I put some regular seafoam type gas, a gas that was already treated with seafoam at the rate of about 2 ounces per gallon, because I had it a little thicker, just for this purpose. And anyway, I poured it in there, and I pulled the on choke. I pulled it 3, 4, 5 times. Still didn't start. So I took all of the adjustment screws, which is the high and low jets that was available on those carburetors. I screwed them out and screwed them right back to where they were. I counted the turns and went right back exactly, and pulled it a few more times and just let it sit. And I came back to it the next day, and it took 3 pulls, and that chainsaw has been running like a dream ever since. And I bet I've cut 20 cord of wood with that little $5 chainsaw. But
I've got a question for you. I was talking with Steve Elkins. He called me this morning before the broadcast. He had a question about the oil to gasoline or gasoline to oil ratio of a 2-cycle engine. And I mentioned to him that it's my opinion that the 2-cycle engine manufacturers had a real tough time meeting EPA requirements. So what they did was they backed off the percentage of oil mixed with gasoline from 16 to 1, 32 to 1, 40 to 1, 50 to 1, less and less and less oil, better oils, but less oil. And I explained to him that the only cooling and lubrication mechanism for these 2-cycle engines, since they don't have a crankcase for splashing oil around, is the vapor of the gasoline mixed with 50 parts gasoline to 1 part oil. Really small amount of oil. And that lubricates the needle bearings, cools off the internals of the engine. I mean, it's really, really tough on all the moving parts to have so little oil. So I said that I believe that it's because of the pollution requirements that they backed off the oil. I said, I'm not doing that. So I mix 32 to 1, meaning 32 parts gasoline to 1 part oil. And I've been doing that in the 2-cycle engines that require or suggest 50 to 1 and 40 to 1. I still mix it with more oil, 32 to 1, and I've never had a problem, and the engines have never failed. And this is in decades. Have you done the same thing?
Exactly. It's so funny you mentioned that. I don't go 32 to 1. I do, even though all of my chainsaws call for 50 to 1, I go 40 to 1. And I use a good synthetic, even though the synthetic oil calls for 100 to 1. Use the steel synthetic. I never go that thin. I always go 32 to 1. I'm sorry, 40. I do 40 to 1. Yeah,
I do 32 to 1. But here's something that class might consider. If you go to buy those engine oil, 2-cycle engine oil bottles, you can buy them in a 6-pack, and they're just like regular, ready to go. All you do is take a gallon, pour in this little bottle. It's pre-thought for you. Everything's done for you, but it's about $2 or more for 2 ounces. I don't do that. I buy the gallon, and I was going to look up the price for a gallon at the Chinese factory outlet of 2-cycle engine oil, and I'll bet you it's like $10. So for $10, you can get 128 ounces, or you can get 2 ounces for $2 if you buy the little bottles.
Yep. I do very similar things. The only time that I change that out, because what I do, you probably do similar things. I will take from my big gallon and pour into one of the small ones, because you can pick up two-stroke motor oil at garage sales for usually $0.25 a bottle.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at the most. Sometimes I've had them just give them to me. You know, and then I'll use those little bottles. I'll pour it from the big one to the little one so I can get a real good exact number. I know I'm not, if you go too heavy on the oil, you will find that people will find, and I'm sure you check this and clean them every once in a while anyway, you'll foul your spark plugs a little sooner. So pay attention to how your saw is running. You know, Vince, there's a sound to an engine that has got enough oil and enough gas, the right kind of gas, that is, and a good clean spark plug and a good clean air cleaner. There's a hum to it when you get it up there to where you're running and working it. And your throttle responses are just instantaneous, and the wood chips are flying like the motorized beaver, you know. You just, there's a sound to that, and you learn to hear it. That's part of that learning curve of living and doing things yourself. It's the same thing with cars, everything. I'm sure you know this, you know, probably as good or better than me. But if you've got something where you've got an older truck or something like this, and the throttle response is wrong, just even though it's just slightly a little off, you can hear it and you can feel it, and you know that you got to start hunting for some kind of a something that's causing that problem, because it's going to continue to get worse.
Absolutely agreed. Kyle, we're going into a break. Can you stay? I've got a question for you about this new balancing technique for tires, which I think is crazy, which is those beads, throwing in some beads inside the tire case to balance the tire. Would you mind sticking around for another segment?
Sure.
So, Kyle, I have been reading about this new balancing technology, and there's nothing new about it. This thing is, there have been attempts to perfect this since the 1950s, I believe, because I read about it in the 60s. And so what happens is, typically what happens when you get a new tire, the wheel is out of balance. The steel wheel is out of balance, or the aluminum magnesium wheel's out of balance from the factory, at least a little bit. And your tire is not exactly balanced either. And then when you put them together, they're still not balanced. Even if you put the red dot on the tire where the valve stem goes, it's still not balanced perfectly. So because of that, I bought a balancer. I bought a used Snap-on brand balancer for $400, and I bought the cone kit for another $120-something, and a three-phase converter for, I don't know how much, maybe less than $100. And I got it all together, and it works. And I balanced our tires, and I found not one tire wheel assembly balanced by anybody previously was right. Not one. They're all imbalanced. And so when you have a tire balancer, you can set how it gets balanced. For example, you can statically balance it, which would be like a bubble balancer, really. So if the tire is not moving, the tire and wheel are not moving, you can balance it. But that's not really balanced. That's just balanced if it's not moving. When the tire is rotating, it's out of balance. So what we do is we dynamically balance. So there's an inside set of wheel weights and an outside set of wheel weights. And it takes us 15 minutes to balance the tire because we work on it till it's absolutely perfect. Now, our balancer, along with others, allows you to round off the weights. So our display will say, put weight on the inside of the wheel, like 1.5 ounces, put 3/4 of an ounce on the outside. It'll tell you exactly where to put it, and then you put the weights on, the lead weights, you spin it up, and you see if it's balanced. Well, we can set ours to round off within 1/2 ounce, which is crazy. It would always be out of balance if we set it for that. But if we had a customer come in and we said, okay, let's balance it up, we'll put the weights on, let's test it, and it comes out perfect on both sides, inside and outside, because we could have set the balancer to round off 1/2 ounce or 3/4 of an ounce or whatever we want, which really means the tire is out of balance. But I believe that's what tire shops do, and I believe that's why I've never seen a set of tires that have been balanced properly. Okay, so fast forward to we're getting dumber, and we can do this job even faster if, when we put new tires on, we look at the chart and it says, okay, it's a 255, 55, 16 tire. It says we throw 3 bags of beads in there. So we throw these 3 pouches of beads inside the tire, seal it up, put air in it, and mount the tire. And we don't have to balance it. Don't need that $10,000 balancing machine, because these beads will roll around on the inside of the tire, and at 55 miles an hour, the tire will be balanced. But when you come to a stop or you slow down, it goes out of balance because the beads all fall to the bottom of the tire. And then when they get spun up to 55 miles an hour, centrifugal force throws these beads out to the spot, which will minimize the effect of the out-of-balance wheel. So the wheels are never balanced. It appears to be the balance. But at slow speeds up to 54 miles an hour, they're not balanced at all. Have you had experience with this nonsense?
I have not, but it's so indicative of what they're doing to our society, Vince, as a rule. Like you just said, everything is trying to become cheaper, more worthless. Just think about it, folks. Just using Vince's idea right there. What does the slap of this tire being out of balance till you get to, say, even if it's 40 miles an hour, let's just say it's that. What's it going to do? It's going to create an imbalance that's going to separate the belts of the tire, so you got to buy another one. It's nothing more than a way to fleece the sheep down further and easier than before. And people are so stupid they'll stand for it. It just to me, it's so terrible. Our whole entire society is moving so far away from self-reliance and common sense and ability to repair, fix, or even think outside the box, or even think about what's happening to them. It's that frog in the boiling water thing. We're getting
Kyle,
to the
we're going
point
into a
where
break.
we're just getting boiled.
We're going into a break. Do you have anything else you'd like to share with us?
I can hold or I can go, Vince. It's either way
Why don't you
like.
hold? Why don't you hold, and Jimmy will get right to you. I just have a couple more comments about these tire beads. Kyle, so I just wanted to finish up this balancing bead, these ceramic beads, this type of pseudo-balancing. It never really balances the tire, in my opinion. But what happens is, there's a chart. You can buy a bucket of these beads for like $150. And you have to put in a certain amount of beads by weight based on the tire weight. So it's about 1 ounce of beads, ceramic beads, for 13 pounds of tire weight. And there's this chart. I'm looking at this chart. So if you have a typical, let's say a Chevrolet, a 2000 type model Chevrolet full-size pickup truck, nothing special, just an American standard pickup truck, whether it be Ford or Chevy. One of the tire sizes that's common is 265, 75, 16. 265, 75, 16. And based on the weight of that tire, you just throw 4 ounces of these beads inside the body of the tire, mount it to the wheel, put air in it, and put the tire. Yeah, we're here. We're here. We put the tire right on the truck. Yes. Can you hear me?
If you can hear me, I just lost you.
Yeah, I've got you, and we can hear you 5 by 5. Maybe our engineer needs to turn up the return to you. Jason, do we have it? Okay. Oh, okay. Hey, thanks, Nathan. Oh, we just lost Kyle. All right, well, let me just finish this up, and then, Jimmy, you're on next. So here's what happens. You put these beads in. I would never do it, but other people do, and it's cheap, and it's quick. And you don't have to be very smart to balance wheels with this system. You don't even need a balancer. All you need is a tire machine. Put the tire, put the beads inside the tire, fill up the tire with air, and put it on the truck. And what happens is, as these beads bounce around as you drive, they only stay in one place at two different times. One is when the vehicle's at rest, then they're at the bottom of the tire, and they fall to the bottom. Or when you're going 55 miles an hour faster, then centrifugal force holds them out against the tread of the tire, but on the inside of the tire. And as they bounce around, they form dust. They clog up the tire valve. So you have to put a different kind of tire valve in there, and if you don't, you won't be able to put air in or out of your tire because the tire valve will get stuck, because you need a filter on the end of the tire valve to prevent the dust from these beads bouncing around and slamming into each other from clogging up the tire valve. So it's a mess. And then they call these eco beads. Really? So when you go to take these tires apart at the end of their life, what do you do with all these beads that run out all over the floor? It's like, would you want 4 ounces of BBs on your shop floor? What are you going to do with them? I guess you put them in the trash, right? Or maybe you scoop them up and try to reuse them. I don't know. But I'm not interested in doing that. I like the lead weights, and I reuse the lead weights. I don't throw them away. I reshape them and put them back on tires for my own purposes. Why would I get rid of them? Because they'll last forever if you take care of them. So that was just one thought and why I would not trust these balancing beads for our vehicles, any of the Finelli's vehicles. Jimmy in Virginia, thank you so much for staying with us.
Yes, sir. How are you doing today?
How can I help you?
Hey, I was just calling in. I used to manage a municipal fire department fleet, and the beads, I researched them, and it was my understanding that the beads for balancing the tires were initially designed for like the over-the-road traction trailers.
That's right.
And you can find a machine that will balance large tires as on an over-road traction trailer, but they're kind of hard to find. And I never did take the chance and put them in the tires because I was a little concerned with the devices inside that tell you whether the tire is going flat, PSI gauge. Yeah. I was concerned that, all those beads bouncing around inside the tire might do some damage to that apparatus inside. So, but I resonate with what you say a lot of times, and the details that you use to take care of matters, and that's the reason why I explored it, because I wanted the trucks to be, as safe as possible and as smooth as possible. And I ended up not using the beads, and we make it fine without having to balance the tires. But I just explored it one time just to see how it, what I could find to make things better, like you do sometimes. Sure.
Well, I've got a comment on that. And back in the 1960s, they used to make these rings, okay, like a hula hoop. And the idea was these hula hoop type accessories, you would kind of hammer them on to your wheel. So around the rim, but on the outside of the wheel, you would kind of tap these into place and they would stay. And in this hula hoop arrangement were these beads. And it would do exactly what you're talking about. Instead of putting the beads inside the tire, it would be in these hula hoop arrangements if you could not balance your tires, the traditional way. But I've got to tell you that in the equipment that we have, let me just give you an example. I bought many, many years ago, I bought a new tow dolly. And a tow dolly is a two-wheel device, single axle, and you hook it up to a trailer hitch. And let's say you've got a vehicle that you want to bring from one place to another. You can drive the vehicle up onto the tow dolly if it's front-wheel drive, or you can back the vehicle onto the tow dolly if it's rear-wheel drive, because you don't want the driving wheels being towed on the ground without lubrication on the transmission and drive line. So we bought this thing new, and we used it a few times. And after I bought the balancer, I wanted to find out if the tires were balanced. Did they balance them at the factory right? I don't know. And since I don't ride on top of the tow dolly, I can't really feel whether the tires are balanced or not. But I'll tell you what, that thing hopped all over the road, empty. So I took the tires off, they're 15-inch tires, put it on the balancer. They're way out of balance from the factory. So what I'm telling you is no one has ever balanced my tires properly according to what I would consider proper, meaning they never were balanced right dynamically. Now, maybe they were balanced statically, but the only time my tires are static is when the vehicle's parked. I don't care about whether my tires are balanced, whether it's parked or not. I want the tires balanced when they're moving. That means they have to be dynamically balanced. And it takes me a long time, literally 15 minutes. So if someone were paying me $60 an hour as, a shop mechanic, the labor rate for me to balance a tire properly would be $15. Nobody would want to spend that. That's without the weights, right?
Right.
So what happens is people balance them quickly. And the customers, some customers think I'm retarded. If I'm helping them, let's say someone comes over and they've got a flat tire and it's a neighbor and I just take care of them, just as a neighbor, not to charge them. They must think I am the slowest guy in the world because I look at it 7 different ways. I figure out the best way to patch it, if that's what I'm going to do. And then I balance it and it takes me a long time. Yeah, but the guy at Walmart, he can balance them real fast. I know he can. But they're not balanced. They appear to be balanced. So to do it right takes a lot longer. And we don't want to do that today. So I think that what you said about the beads that's exactly what I figured out. I don't want to use them.
Yes, sir. And I brought a set of tires for my wife's car here recently, and they use the inside the tire where they take the adhesive weights and stick them to the rim.
Yes.
And I just don't know about that. I don't like it, but because there's no way. Not that I don't trust it, but sooner or later that adhesive's going to wear out.
I'll tell you what we do. Now, there are certain tires that wheels you have to do that with, because the manufacturer of the wheel did not design that wheel for a hammer-on weight, meaning one with the clip in the lead or the coating to prevent corrosion on the aluminum magnesium wheel. So you have to use adhesive weights. What we do is we clean, first of all, one of the reasons it takes so long for us to balance is we pick out all the rocks and stones in the tread, if there are any, okay, if we're rebalancing. Then what we do is we take a garden hose and we wash the wheel and the tire. We get all the dirt off it because you can't balance a dirty, mud-packed wheel. So we wash them, and then we put them in the sun, let them dry a little bit, then we put them on the balancer. Okay, and for those adhesive weights, what we do is we use carburetor cleaner and a paper towel, a shop towel, and we'll spray the area where the balancer says this is where the weight goes. We'll spray the paper towel with carburetor cleaner. We will clean off that area so there's no grease left, and then we'll apply the weights. And then we tap them with a hammer, and we have a Teflon-coated hammer, and we tap the weights into the shape of the curvature of the wheel. Tap, tap, tap. So now we have the lead weight, which is now curved, so it adheres perfectly, and they don't seem to fall off. That's how we do it. That's another reason why it takes us 15 minutes.
Yes, sir. Well, the way you just described your protocol, how you take care of that situation or ensure that it's going to work is how I operate, and I notice around me it seems to drive people crazy, but people just don't want to take the time to do stuff right anymore, and I'm not going to compromise, especially when it's my wife's safety,
Mm-hmm. Well, Jimmy, I'm so glad you called. If you have a couple more minutes, I'd like to discuss tires with you.
Yes, sir. And
yeah. Okay.
Forgive me for interrupting. I really called in maybe to talk a little bit about the fuel storage, if you've got some input on that too later on.
All right. Let's stay with tires for just a minute.
Yes, sir. It sounds good to me.
All right. So when I buy tires, it takes me a long time to figure out which tires. Now we have an account with one of the largest tire distributors in the country. So when we call, we pay wholesale prices for tires, and they deliver them next day. So we have access to pretty much any kind of tire we want. But when I buy tires, and I've been doing this even before we had this account, I will research the different brands and the different prices, and the different tread designs and the different construction. So I look at the number of tread plies. I look at whether it's a nylon or a rayon tire. Now, nylon tires, the nylon, at the base of the tire, when you're parked in the cold weather, nylon seems to set. And that tire does not become round until you drive it for a while. So if you have extremely cold climates and you buy a nylon cord tire, it's going to thump, 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 thump for probably 3, 4, 5 miles. And if you think you can get in your car and just take off with a nylon tire, whether it's steel belted or not, you're going to really be rough on the tires. So you have to drive it very slowly for the first several miles until the tire warms up a little bit so that you take that flat spot out of the tire. Rayon doesn't seem to have that characteristic. So when we buy tires, we look at the construction, and then we do something else. We look at the tread depth. We look at the number of expected miles that tire will last. And we look at one more thing that I don't think any tire salesperson has ever heard the question for. How much does that tire weigh? And I'll tell you why when we come back. Jimmy's with us in Virginia. I'm going to be driving on a dirt road, and I do want to have some traction, but if the lugs are too big, I'm going to pick up big stones and I'm going to throw them against the underside of the vehicle and beat up the underside of the vehicle. So I look at, and also the bigger the lugs, the greater the noise, the bigger the lugs in the tread, the worse the fuel economy is going to be. You'll lose miles per gallon with a heavy, chunky tire. So that's one of the things I look at. But I want to talk about this other thing, too. I look at the weight of the tire. Okay? And so how many people have gone to a tire shop and said, so how much do those tires weigh? Nobody asked that question. But I do. So I look it up on the Internet. I look up, and you go to TireRack.com, and it will show you the diameter of the tires. It will tell you the weight of the tire. So let me give you an example. I'm more impressed with a tire that weighs 27.5 pounds compared to a tire that weighs 25 pounds in the same size. Now, why is that? Because I figure that, and this is just my own opinion, if I'm buying a tire that's typically 25 pounds, but another one for around the same price is 27.5 pounds, I'm getting 10% more material in that 27.5 pound tire. So my conclusion is it's probably better. And I don't buy single ply sidewall tires. I think that's crazy because single ply, that's where it's at today. If you look at the Chinese factory outlet and you read the number of plies, you'll see most of them have one ply. One ply is one step up from a balloon. A balloon has no plies. I want at least 2 plies in the sidewall, at least, because I don't want the tires to blow out. Another thing that I want to tell you about tires is when you look at them, they all have ratings with 3 designations. Like it may say 100 AA. 100 means that would be a standard wear tire from which all others are compared. The next letter A would be the traction, and the next letter A would be temperature. So if you live in Florida, where the roads get really hot, you want a tire that can withstand a high temperature, because the road is, maybe 100 degrees. So hot that you can't walk on it with bare feet. I mean, you can try it. First thing you do is get some burn ointment and get that, and then take your shoes off and walk down the road barefooted. And the next thing you're going to do is be applying the burn ointment. I'm only being facetious about that. Don't do it, because you will burn your feet because the roads are that hot. So the letter designations A, B, and C indicate how good the tires perform in traction and temperature. Actually, the best is AA, then A, then B, then C is the worst for traction and temperature. 100 would be the standard designation for tread life or tread wear. The tires I buy, well, like if you get a 200 AA, that would last twice as long theoretically as a 100. I buy tires that are 800 or 820 AA with the thickest tread in 30 of an inch and the heaviest. That's what I like to buy, and I shop based on that. Any thoughts, comments, concerns, Jimmy, about what I just said?
I follow the same protocols and use the same website. And another example that I used that I can add to what you just said is that the tire that I just got for my wife's car, her car weighs 4,000 pounds, and the tire's rated at 1709 each. So I take that in consideration. And it was a Continental tire. And at the end of the size on the imprinted on the sidewall, it said 99H or 99T. Now I wanted the 99H because it's an extra load tire at 51 psi. And when I got home, I should have looked when I was down there at the service center, but they put 99Ts that are 44 psi. I called him up and he said bring it back, and he switched them out. And driving the car 70 miles with both tires on it, coming home, I did notice a difference in handling. I was surprised. Same tire, same name, and everything. It's just that different rating of 99H on the end or 99T.
Mm-hmm.
So I was pretty amazed by that. And I do look at the weight of the tire also. One thing you might find interesting, when I was buying tires for fire trucks, a major company that I used to buy from, manufacturer, they didn't plant enough rubber trees one year, so they got caught short, and they ended up buying rubber from China.
Oh, man.
So I had to switch brand names. But that kind of stuff happens too. You know, you have a major brand name that you've been dealing with for years,
Mm-hmm.
and if you don't do your research and figure out what's really going on behind the scenes, you can find out if you spend the time to find out. And I was glad to find that out before I brought some of them.
So for our class who may not know this, the 99T tires are rated at 118 miles an hour. 99H are rated at 130 miles an hour. That's a major difference. So
Yes,
I have a book that it's called mine's old. It's 2 years old. It's called the 2017 Tire Guide. It's complete tire and truck wheel information for cars and trucks. Okay, this book is 432 pages of the major brand names. It tells me what size tire is the right tire for each vehicle. It tells me the front and rear tire pressure. It tells me the width of the rim and the type of the rim. It tells me the diameter of the bolt circle and the torque of the lug nuts. That's all it tells me. 432 pages for most vehicles. That's how complex this has become. So when you buy tires, do you really think you want to go to the Chinese factory outlet and ask one of their professionals as to what tires you should buy? Do you really think so? I don't think so. Because they sell one-ply tires. One-ply. Goodyear. One Goodyear. The industry joke is Goodyear, they're good for a year.
Yeah.
That's the inside joke. Because Goodyear is not the tire that you might think it is.